Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar, HVAC of the Future, Solving the Home Electrification Challenge. I'm Joe Wachunas from Electrify Now and NBI, New Buildings Institute. Here as always with my teammate Brian Stewart from Electrify Now, and we'll introduce our panelists Craig and Winnie today. We're so excited to have them and to have you on our program. Like we usually do, if folks want to put into the chat, I'll do that in a second. I'll give you the permission where you're coming from. We always love to hear where folks are coming from. If this is your first Electrify Now webinar, we are an all-volunteer organization that believes that electrification is the quickest way to decarbonize and save all of us both money and carbon emissions. And we try to boil our message into 4 clear steps. Number 1, clean up your electric supply, be with solar panels on your roof, or subscribing to a community solar program or utilities clean energy program. Number 2 is electrify your home. We're going to be talking about a lot of that today, and the contractors that will do that. We have lots of webinars on our YouTube page. Just Google Electrify Now YouTube. 3 is electrify your transportation, your electric car or electric bike. And 4 is electrify everyone, increasing access to these game-changing, money-saving technologies. And speaking of electrify everyone, we want to say thank you to everyone who donated in signing up for this webinar today to Seeds for the Soul. They are a Corvallis-based organization that is one of the Electrify Coalition members. They collect donations and help income-qualified homes install solar panels and other electrification technologies with no upfront costs. So they're a really great program. And check out their website. We'll put it in the chat in a second, Seeds for the Soul. And thank you for donating. Big shout out to our Electrify Coalition. These are the over 50 members, organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, trade organizations that are part of the Electrify Coalition and that believe in electrification as a means to decarbonization. If you'd like to join, just email Brian or I. Our emails are on our website, electrifynow.net. Okay, Brian, tell us about why are we talking about HVAC contractors today?
Thanks, Joe. Well, okay, first of all, starting with the big picture, I think everyone has this idea that in order to decarbonize our buildings, which is one of the largest sources of greenhouse emissions in all of the United States, there's a lot of work to do. And that means that we need a lot of people out there who own homes that need to be making the right decisions, but we also need the workforce to be able to do that. And if you really start to examine the scale of the problem, you can see that there are a lot of things that are difficulties for homeowners, but are potentially opportunities. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today. So let's take a look at the Northwest here. So in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, we have really good information about the homes that are out there. And so if we're thinking that our goal is to get to all of these homes to be electrified, which is pretty much what we need to do in order to avoid the worst effects of climate change, we've got a lot of work to do, and it's good to know what we're up against. So check this out. First of all, most of the homes that are out there are older. So over 55% of them were built before 1980. That's not a bad thing. I mean, we live in an older home. Older homes are great, but they come potentially with some issues in terms of upgrades that can make this transition to electrification difficult, or not necessarily difficult, but complicated and maybe confusing for homeowners. So let's look at the characteristics of those homes. In general, what we see is about half of the homes that are in this area, it's very possible that they've got an electrical panel that's 100 amps or less, which can pose some challenges. It doesn't mean that you can't electrify if that's the situation, but it can pose some challenges. It's very likely that, again, about half of those homes need some kind of wall or attic insulation upgrades, or maybe they need some window improvements because the envelope of the building isn't up to current codes and therefore isn't as efficient as it should be and could be. We see that about half those homes have gas or propane water heaters, which again, that's an opportunity. It's a challenge too. We need to shift those out to clean electric devices. About 60% of the homes in this area are heated with gas, oil, or propane. That's a lot of heat pumps to be installed. It's great if you're a heat pump installer. And then, even cooking, we see about 30% of the ranges in these homes are gas or propane. So if you're a homeowner and you own one of these older homes, what that means is that you could be faced with multiples of these upgrade situations. You might need windows to be upgraded. You might need insulation. You might need new ducting or ducting improvements to make sure that the air that's coming through your system is moving as efficiently as possible. You might need electrical updates. You might need a heat pump or a heat pump water heater installed. And you might be interested in an EV charger or an induction range or potentially even rooftop solar. So if you're a homeowner and you're thinking, wow, I've got all these things that are on my to-do list, perhaps, in order to get my home to be the kind of home that I want to live in, where do you start? Which of these things might be best to do first? Who do I call? How do I think about this without it just being overwhelming? And that's why I think there's such an opportunity to develop this workforce that sees this situation and has the tools and the solutions to help homeowners to kind of work through these in a sensible way that can make it easier for them to do, but also potentially save them money. And that's why we want to talk about this concept of HVAC of the future. Instead of having to call 6 contractors, what if you could just call one? Or what if you had one that could be a sort of GC, general contractor type person, to help you navigate through this situation? So these are the things that we're going to be talking about today in our webinar. And we're going to be talking about what are these critical services that this kind of integrated HVAC contractor should be able to provide. And why does that simplify it and potentially even lower costs for the homeowner if they could work with reputable companies that have those services? And then how does this potentially best leverage the incentives that are available? I think people are familiar with the IRA, and there's other local incentives that can be confusing, just the number of those that are available and who qualifies and what order should I use them in, all that sort of stuff. And what does this process look like? So if you're a homeowner that's faced with these multiple upgrade situations, what would a good integrated process look like? And then again, then we can start thinking about what this means in terms of the workforce that we need, because obviously if you extrapolate all these homes that need these kinds of upgrades, and we have a timeline to get this done, that means that there is a lot of demand for skilled professionals who can do this work. How do we make sure that we've got the workforce that we need? And importantly, how do we do that at scale? And also, how can we introduce the concept of diversity into this workforce, which I think most people would agree is not. We'll hear more about that later from our panelists. But how do we leverage diversity to make this workforce even stronger, more powerful, and use that also to create just and resilient communities, so that not only are we just making our homes better, but our communities are benefiting from all this work. So that's why we've got 2 really great panelists today to talk about all these issues. We're going to start with Craig Acker from Greensavers. He's the operations manager. Greensavers is a dedicated home performance contractor. They're one of the leaders in Oregon in terms of electrification, and they have this systems approach to home improvement. And they've really pioneered this idea of home electrification work in Oregon. They've won the Energy Star Home Performance Contractor of the Year for the last 7 years in a row, and they're a certified B Corporation. So I have no qualms at all about recommending them, and have recommended a lot of people to their services over the years. So first we'll be hearing from Craig, then we'll be hearing from Winnie Wakaba from Emerald Cities Collaborative. She's the Economic Inclusion Manager. She's focused on workforce development. Sorry for the typo there. That's workforce, not workforce. ECC is a national nonprofit network of organizations working to create sustainable, just, and inclusive economies around energy, green infrastructure, and other sustainable development projects. And they're doing some really good things in the Seattle area on workforce development that we'll be hearing about. So with that, I want to stop sharing and turn it over to Craig and let him take it away from there.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Hey, everybody. See if I can figure out how to start sharing my thing here. All right, we up?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. I'm Craig Ocker. I'm currently the operations manager here at Greensavers. I've been working here for about the last 10 years. And when I first started, we're a home performance company, and I really didn't know anything about any of this stuff, like heating equipment, any of the things. And in the beginning, Greensavers, we did a lot of upgrading people to high efficiency furnaces because that was what we were up to. And came into this sort of like pushing electrification almost by accident. Before it was a thing that we saw as like a empirical end onto itself. We were using heat pump solutions basically because they provided the most economical and effective way to get comfort for people in houses. We were doing it because it was the most functional thing we could do. And then the wind of electrification just kind of caught our sail. And so the cool thing was we were already kind of there and thinking about implementation. So that's kind of who I am and who we are. And today I'm here just kind of talk about this. So like Brian teed it up really well. There's certain things that are really, when you're in the quest for electrification, there's certain things that certainly help a lot if you think about them ahead of time, because the way you stage stuff and the way you set these things up can make a really big difference in how efficient the process is, and how many times you have to have each kind of contractor come to your house, and how much it ends up costing you, and how well the whole system works in the end. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how kind of finding a holistic contractor can really help out with this process. And then obviously also if not everyone has a holistic contractor in their neighborhood, and if you don't, sort of what are the things you should be thinking about so that you can get it right on your own. Okay, so I think, let me see here if I can. All right, so like to kind of back it up a little bit, we're talking about HVAC contractors here, and I think that HVAC contractors end up in the middle of this because that heating system change out is kind of the biggest thing to take on in the process of electrification. It's probably the biggest expense that you're going to need to incur, and it's going to have the most dramatic impact on the energy use of your home. But there's just a lot of steps that happen before that, before you get your heat pump, that pave the way for it to happen. And then there's a lot of things you should probably be doing after you get that thing installed to make sure that it works as it's designed and has the effect that you desire. So for me, if I try to crystallize what the challenge is here when we're trying to electrify homes, it's like, how do you coordinate all the steps so that you can make a process that's as smooth, efficient, and economical as possible? And so when I'm thinking about that, I'm saying, all right, what are the obstacles, right? What are the things we're going to run into? So if I'm going to break that down, so there are electrical issues, right? And Brian touched on some of those. What kind of panel do we have? There are some panels that are real easy to upgrade with the big circuits that we need to run for heat pumps and induction stoves and heat pump water heaters. And then there are other panels, like Federal Pacific, that a lot of electricians don't even want to get anywhere near. And so some of those things, regardless of your service size, like how many amps you're getting from the grid, there are certain panels that just require attention before we can even begin to do our work. And then service size is the thing too. And if you have that 100 amp service and you're trying to fully electrify a house, including with vehicle charging and house heat, home heat, water heat, and cooking, you probably do need to upgrade that service size. And so planning all those things out, trying to set those goals early, can make a really big difference in which thing you need to do first. And in some cases, the thing you need to do first is update that panel and service. Other stuff that comes into play are like existing circuits. A lot of times we go to houses that have resistance electric water heaters that we want to upgrade to heat pump water heaters, but the existing circuit lines are either they're not the right gauge or they're not properly grounded. And and getting ahead of those things and knowing if you're going to have to pull new circuits, is a really good idea. And then as we back up to like the rest of the home, you know, if we need to weatherize houses, like you can imagine, like the knob and tube wiring is the type of old-fashioned wiring that can be a fire hazard and is typically needed to be remediated before we insulate over it. And it's one of those considerations that it's really handy to have to think about up front, because it can add cost to a project, and depending on what stages you're going to be doing, if you're doing a bunch of electrical work, having a knob and tube remediation done at the same time can actually save you money and make things simpler. There's mechanical obstacles, right? Is the system going to fit? And you know, old duct systems are frequently not optimized for the kind of high volume, relatively low temperature airflow that heat pumps kick out. And so, and basically modern heat pumps, we could have a whole webinar about those, but they're super efficient and rad if they're installed well and in systems that allow them to work. But they can actually also use a ton of energy if they're trying to push air through suboptimal duct systems. And then just, you know, sizing is a big consideration. I mean, historically, the HVAC industry has a problem with oversizing things, and trying to get that right is an important thing to think about. And I guess as I'm thinking about these obstacles, I'm thinking about historically who would handle these things. And I didn't mention it back on electrical, but all that stuff is really an electrician that you need to talk to figure that stuff out. And on this mechanical stuff, it's your HVAC contractor, right? Who would be the one who would be able to answer all these questions. And then we think about envelope stuff, right? Is the house insulated? Is it properly air sealed? That can make a huge difference in how big a system you need. Is it optimized for indoor air quality? And, you know, so do we have to think about ventilation when we're thinking about these heat pump systems? And then are there hazardous materials or conditions? And so I think a lot about vermiculite in attics that can have asbestos in it. And that's another thing that kind of has to be removed before we begin doing things. And this is all stuff you'd really have to talk to a weatherization contractor about. Then finally, water heaters. You know, heat pump water heaters are this awesome technology that save a ton of energy, and they're definitely a necessary part of the future, but they cause all kinds of problems from a ease standpoint. You know, a lot of heat pump water heaters don't actually have the water inputs and outputs in the same place that the water heater you're replacing did. They're usually on the side as opposed to the top. And so you have to get some plumbing done to get those to connect. And then like I said, the circuits are frequently not up to code. You know, a lot of houses have old galvanized pipes that it's real scary to touch because you can kick off big chunks of corrosion and clog things up. And then heat pump water heaters also produce a cold air stream as a byproduct of efficiently heating water. And so if you're putting those in conditioned spaces in people's basements, they can chill an area out, and that can be annoying to people. So you might have to duct them out. And because of all that stuff, like there's plumbing, there's electrical, there's whatever, like when I think about who can handle that, like almost no one wants to handle all of it. Plumbers don't really like to duct things, and HVAC contractors don't really like to do plumbing, and electricians don't like to do either of those things. And so there's, you know, it's a trick there to find people who can really do all the stuff. And why does it matter? And it's kind of because surprises can be costly. I think, you know, that's kind of why it's helpful to know up front if you're trying to budget. Like, yeah, you can get a price for a heat pump, but if somebody doesn't dig in and figure out that you want to do all this other stuff too, and help you realize that you have to plan for a panel and service upgrade, that's a $6,500 surprise that you might not be ready for. And you know, if we have to remove and replace insulation so that we can, you know, like a lot of homeowners who called us 5 years ago got their attic insulated to R60, and now they call us and they want an air handler put up there. We can't do that without removing that insulation, so we can run the ductwork, and then we have to blow it back in there again. So that can add a bunch of costs, and that was just a staging situation, you know, and all these other things too, knob and tube, duct sealing, new electrical circuits that can all add a significant cost to projects. And so thinking about it ahead of time and planning can be really helpful. So, and if you were going to find this dream contractor, like who could help you plan all this stuff out, what would it look like? It'd be really great to get somebody who could assess all the aspects of the home and the project. So like, and some of this is elementary and some of it's not, but like, any HVAC contractor, if they're actually doing their job and they're sizing your system properly, like I always tell this to my team, like there's no way you can sell a heat pump without going in the attic. Even if the heat pump's in the basement, but if you don't go in the attic and figure out how insulated that house is, how can you ever pretend like you're going to know how big a system to install? And if you're not checking that ductwork and to make sure that it's connected and insulated, then you also, like, so a lot of this stuff is like, should be elementary, but it's in the realities of the marketplace, it's not, because, everybody's busy, everybody's hustling, everybody's trying to get these jobs, everybody's trying to keep costs low. And so there is pressure on HVAC contractors to like skip a lot of these steps, but the ideal contractor would do it. They would be able to at least coordinate the electrical. It's becoming more common now, but because of just how tricky it is to get electrical licenses, it's rare that HVAC contractors have them in-house. But a good one would be able to coordinate all of it, including knob and tube remediation, panel and service upgrade, electrical car charging, and solar. Obviously, they could install HVAC. That's a critical part of it. Ideally, they could weatherize a house. And that idea of being able to have a weatherization crew that can come in and insulate right after your HVAC crew gets done installing equipment is really helpful. They'd be willing to install a heat pump water heater and duct it out if need be. Again, it's a rare thing to find, and it would be great. Ideally, they would file all the incentive paperwork for you, because home performance contractors, good HVAC contractors will know what of their equipment qualifies for which incentive and maximize the benefit to the homeowners. And they would be able to advise you about tax credits and what of their equipment qualifies for those things. And especially with the IRA now, and as rules start to come out for that stuff, that gets more and more important. So, and how does all this stuff, if you had that contractor, like how would it help you? Part of it would just be financial prioritization. Like sometimes if you have a limited budget, like weatherization is an awesome thing to do first, right? Like if you're trying to save energy in your home, making sure your walls and attic are insulated are kind of the most important and biggest bang for your buck things you can do. However, if you're going to be doing a zoned HVAC system and going to be installing an air handler at some point, like I just said, it's way smarter to do that before you insulate your attic. And so even though weatherization is this big win, having it be strategized properly is huge. Another thing that I like to point out, like from a financial standpoint, is that a heat pump water heater can offset more kilowatts than a average sized solar array, and for a lot of people in like inner, like at least here in our neighborhood in inner Portland, where we have kind of like smaller homes or cut up roofs, people are like, oh, I want to say that notion that helping somebody realize that like all those solar panels are doing are offsetting kilowatt usage. And if you can offset the same amount by buying a $3,000 water heater as you can from a $20,000 solar system, certainly you should do both. But if you're going to start with one, helping people see that there's ways you can save energy.
Greg, I love that comparison, and we've thought about that and written about that as well. Yeah, it's something around 6 to 7 solar panels are equivalent to all the electricity you save with heat pump water heaters, and it's a lot cheaper. Yeah, so great point.
Yeah, no, it's a huge one, and I think helping people understand that kilowatt hours are kilowatt hours. You're buying watts and buy cheap watts first, and then buy the expensive ones next. Whatever, helping people understand these things. Heat pump water heaters are way less sexy than solar panels. So, people, there's people who want to.
You haven't seen Joe in his heat pump water heater costume though. That's pretty sexy.
Yeah, well, I'm coming to the party next year. And then just this idea of like helping what the upfront cost for all these things and the potential pitfalls and the upgrades are going to be ahead of time can help a lot just for you to plan, and like, well, how are you going to pay for this? And financing can be a thing, and so integrated contractors can help with that.
Greg, sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that one of the things we've been talking a lot about with the IRA is that these incentives, the tax incentives in particular, have caps, yearly caps. But So, a smart way to take advantage of that is to maximize your yearly cap 1 year and then come back and, take advantage of the incentives that are available the next year for a different project. So that's another reason why having kind of a plan, a master plan, like you're talking about, where you're thinking about what to do first and staging these things, you can save yourself some money that way too, by not doing it all in 1 year, but, maybe spreading it out to take advantage, maximize the IRA benefits.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I was going to mention it at some point, but there's more to come on that, right? As the rules get written for these other things, there's, there's actually money in the IRA for home electrification for, low and middle income people. And there's also basically a home performance based incentive there, that thing where if you can model 30% energy savings on an overall project, you can get, so like, yes, a home performance contractor integrated HVAC contractor who could help you design like the kind of minimum projects you could do this year to hit that 30% and get that $4,000 incentive. And then next year come in and get 2,000 more. And then, yes, right. Like we have fully, like we're doing a lot of scheming here about how we're going to come up with packages that can help people take advantage of these things, maximum advantage of these incentives, because that's what they're there for, like to get everybody to do all the things. And so, yeah, it's really exciting, but it is, like you say, really helpful to plan it ahead of time. And then, so I have on here, like that integrated service provider, like that health and safety aspect is important, right? Like knowing if your wiring is safe and up to code is critical, and basically like knowing about it ahead of time. So, if you're going to incur these expenses, you can plan them into your budget. Upgrading HVAC is a great time to address your indoor air quality. So it's really nice if you have a contractor who can assess what the air leakage is at your house and know whether you need an HRV or an ERV to help to improve air quality. And so again, integrated contractor who can look at the big picture.
Craig, can you just tell us what HRV and ERV stands for?
Yeah, sorry. These are just balanced ventilation systems that, so HRV is a heat recovery ventilator and an ERV is an energy recovery ventilator. They're very similar things. Heat recovery ventilator just basically it takes stale air out of your house and exhausts it to the outside, and it pulls fresh air in, and it actually runs those two things through a heat exchanger. So it transfers some of the energy from the indoor air into the fresh air before it gets exhausted out. And so it's like a very efficient way to provide clean filtered air to your home, which is probably the number one thing you can do for air quality. And assessing whether homes need that, certainly installing an HRV or any of these ventilation systems is the time to do it when you're tearing apart the rest of the HVAC system. And so having a contractor that can help you understand what you might need in that department or what your options would be, that's helpful. And then health and safety, we talk about obviously we're talking about electrification here, but like knowing whether your water heater is drafting properly and whether its combustion is clean and it's not creating a ton of carbon monoxide can really help make a decision. Like the easiest way to sell a water heater is to tell somebody that theirs is going to kill you. And knowing that if systems are working well, it can really help prioritize stuff. If you have a water heater that's dangerous, that's probably becomes a high priority compared to anything else. So, and then the incentives, we kind of talked about it, right? Like a good integrated service provider can help process rebates for you, or maybe even give you rebates up front, and then timing and tax credits. And I think Brian talked about that really, really succinctly, right? That helping people design projects to maximize these incentives that exist is a helpful thing. All right, so just like, what do I think if we find that ideal contractor, what would the process look like? I think ideally it would start with a whole home assessment, like someone who comes into your house and looks in all the places, gets in your attic, gets in your crawl space, checks out your ducts, checks out your heating system, and gets you proposals to upgrade that. Like, oh, it'll cost this much to do all these things, but also maybe some kind of report, that gives you the information on the stuff that you have and the reasons why, so that you can make informed decisions about what to do. And then once you have all this information, obviously being able to provide a holistic contractor will be able to provide somebody who knows their stuff to consult with you on, why are you recommending this and not that? And, And here at Green Savers, we actually typically do things that are quite different than a lot of the HVAC industry, insofar as that, like, we don't offer people a lot of like good, better, best options or something, like, which I think a lot of it's a common thing. Like, oh, you can buy this cheap air conditioner, you can buy a middle one, or you can buy a real expensive one. And like, you can decide. We are just kind of like, this is the thing you should get. Like, we kind of talk to you, we understand your budget, we understand what the needs of your home are, and like, this is the thing you should get. And if somebody's like, well, why? We can try to explain it. And then if they're like, well, I don't want to pay that much, we can be like, well, there are other options, and here they are, but here's why we didn't recommend them originally. But just like having somebody who can consult and help you through that, I think is key. And then obviously having the process, would be like an in-house team to coordinate the project. So like, with all the teams that are going to be doing the work, that's electricians, that's plumbers, that's remediators. If you have to get knob and tube or vermiculite remediation, whatever, coordinates all that stuff for you, it can make a really big difference. And then obviously the follow-up stuff, can they coordinate inspections, permits, utility paperwork, QC tests, because a lot of that can be a pain in the butt. And people who just do it all the time are a little better at it, not a lot better, but a little.
Question for you. So, I think a lot of times, Joe and I, we're advocating for home electrification. So we're always thinking about, the ideal scenario where people are really trying to go all in and just, like do the whole thing. But there are a lot of people who will be, calling you, I'm sure, because their furnace broke, or because their water heater broke, or because they're thinking of upgrading their furnace maybe. And so they may be thinking about one piece of the job, and without this big picture to begin with. Talk a little bit about, how, I'm sure you often are in the situation where you're saying, well, have you thought about this? Or do you think you might get an EV in the future? These questions that actually maybe force or ask homeowners to think a little bit bigger picture than they might have been to begin with. And because it does seem like there are some opportunities, like you say, to do some of these things ahead of time can save you some money. Tell us a little bit about how those, is that a frequent thing?
Yeah, right. It is. And sort of the nature of what we've done kind of always sort of been not just like being a home performance contractor in general is about like, people call you and they say, hey, I need a new furnace. Like, that's like, we get that all the time, right? And then you get out there and you're like, well, why do you need a new furnace? They're like, oh, there's one room in my house that's super uncomfortable and I need, and it's like, a lot of the work that we have to do is, in contrast to certain industries or certain trades where somebody just knows what they need and you just have to say, I can provide that. We have to spend a lot of time and energy kind of educating people on actually what they need, right? Like, what's the thing that is going to solve this problem? Like, that's a historical thing that we've always been. And now I think when we are going out into the world with electrification in mind, it's not just about educating about the specific problems of this house. It's also this added thing where we're like, here's the right thing to do, right? Like, I hear this, like, you have this need, and let me just back it up and tell you something about the big picture about where the world is headed. And, and even people who have never thought about buying an electric vehicle, when you suggest to them that it would be really smart to think about that in 10 years, you're going to need a car charger here, and probably faster than that. People are always like, or frequently are like, oh yeah, okay, that's good. And like, you can create these bridges with people who had no idea that they would be in the position to be electrifying their home. And so, yeah, that does come up a lot. And I think one of the big ones is when people call for air conditioners. So they have furnaces already and they want an air conditioner. And sometimes that furnace is 4 years old. And we have to go in there and say, I hear you that you want us to put an air conditioner on this, but let me explain how this is going to trap you into a cycle of fossil fuels. Right? Because if we put a cheap air conditioner on this, or even a good air conditioner on this furnace, when it dies in 10 years, you are going to say, well, I have this nice air conditioner. I just need an air handle. I'm going to replace the furnace because I have this good air, and so for us trying to, like, we have to, because of the nature of the market, we're going out to people's houses who call us and say they want an air conditioner. And what we are trying to do is tear out their furnace and replace that thing with a high efficiency heat pump. And so, yeah, that's like, and trying to try to explain how this project fits into an overall long-term project of something they might have never thought they were going to be a part of. So
Greg,
it's work.
just want to do a quick time check. We're at about 25 minutes. I know time flies. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I've been trying to pay attention, and I'm pretty much done.
I'm slowing him down.
Yeah. All right. So basically, all right, we kind of have an idea of like what, if in a dream world, what that contractor would look like and what the process would look like. And so Green Savers right now, we are in this position where we're like, we are talking about creating new service categories of, and like, so this is a real salient thing for me to be talking about, because we have this beyond net zero offering that we're designing right now. And like, whatever, I'd be happy to share more information about that with anybody who's interested, but it's basically that's like asking these questions, like how can we be the best we can be, not just like Brian was saying, where we're reacting to the things that people are asking for, but can we come to the market with a product offering of this holistic roadmap? Like, you're probably not going to be able to do it all right now, but if you have the map laid out in front of you, you will know what you need to do first and what you need to do second and what you need to do third. And so like, this is kind of like what this is like the first page of our report, our Beyond Net Zero report, if you called us and had, or, you know, got this full audit. And then this is like what the table of contents looks like, right? So we can talk about weatherization and purification and electrification. I think Sadie went a little nuts with the Asians on here, but you get the picture. And again, this is like aspects of kind of what in that perfect like world, like that report, the roadmap that you have, so that you can pick things off and do it in the right order, so that you're doing it in the most efficient way possible. And just kind of like in the way of wrapping up, like, all right, so I kind of talked about all the good things that would come of having holistic contractors. And I think pitfalls are potentially costs, right? Like Screensaver, certainly we have more overhead than a lot of the single measure contractors who we compete against in all these individual service categories. And so it can cost a little bit more. I mean, to engage for each individual part, maybe with a holistic contractor, I think that, you know, part of my point here is, unless you're really organized and you know a lot about what you're doing, I think there's potential that you could argue that in the long run, engaging a company like us could save you money and optimize your incentives in a way that could offset that additional cost. But I think upfront, if you're the person who called us for an air conditioner and you looked at the two bids and somebody said, "Oh, I'll sell you an air conditioner for $4,000," and I said, "I'll sell you a heat pump for 15," I could imagine that being a little bit, you know, jarring at first. And it's certainly something we need to be mindful of, is how we can serve the whole community, right? Like how can we tap into additional resources so that we can bring what we do to a more broad audience? You know, we don't want to price ourselves into some little Gucci corner of the market. So that is a potential drawback. Lead times are definitely a problem right now. And this is going to tie in, I think, a lot to what Winnie's going to talk about, is like this workforce development is an issue. I mean, and Brian kind of alluded to it. We need to install a lot of heat pumps in the next 5 years, and we do not have enough people to do it. And so if you find a company like us who can put these packages together, unfortunately, if you call me right now, you know, and say, "Hey, I'm cold. Can you give me a new high efficiency heat pump?" I can be like, I can give you something in June that'll be a great air conditioner, you know, but unfortunately I can't be as responsive to the needs of people right now as I wish I could. And then holistic contractors are hard to find. It's like hard to find people who employ all the people that you need to get this, to make this work well. So that's why we need ideas for workforce development. And yeah, just finally, like, okay, so if you can't find one of these contractors, you can't find it work, I think important stuff is asking a lot of questions. I think standard HVAC contractors tend to know a lot more than they'll drop on you if they think you just want an air conditioner, you know? Like that idea that we go into people's homes who think they just want an air conditioner, and we try to tell them that they want something different. I think a lot of HVAC contractors will probably err on the other side. They're going to just give you the price for the thing you wanted without assuming that you maybe might be interested in a whole bunch more. And that doesn't necessarily mean they don't know a whole bunch more. So asking questions about sizing, about air quality, about ventilation, about about electrification can actually get them talking about things that they do have skills in, but might not have led with. Making a plan ahead of time, like just like getting your own notions, like, maybe that means getting bids from a whole bunch of people and then sort of putting them in front of you and trying to strategize. Okay, well, if I'm going to do work in the attic on the HVAC system, I should probably do that first, and then I can get the weatherization and just like map it out, and then helping your contractors work together. So if you have an electrician if you have an HVAC contractor who's going to be doing some stuff, and they're going to have to hire an electrician to run the circuit, then work with them to see, okay, well, is now a good time for a panel upgrade or any of these other things we've discussed? I mean, I think just like facilitating these contractors working together can help, because a lot of times they can collaborate to make all the things that you need to happen, but they just need a little bit of motivation to communicate and do that. And then lean on utilities and on programs and on organizations like Electrify Now. Like there are resources out there that can help you understand this stuff. In Oregon, we have the Energy Trust. I think they certainly know a lot about some things. You can lean on them, and other utility and incentive programs could potentially help you too. So yeah, lean on the experts and see if you can find some support. And
Thanks.
Yep, and I think that's it. That's me.
Appreciate it. And Craig, if you could put your email in the chat, that'd be fantastic for folks that are local and would love to get in touch.
Yeah.
Great. Really appreciate that, folks. If you're interested in questions, please put them in the Q&A. And Craig, if you could stop sharing when you can then load her slides up, that'd be great. Thank you so much. And we'll save Q&A till the end, and we'll probably go a couple minutes after. But as always, got a lot of good content for this webinar.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
Oh, it went back to there you go.
We are seeing
Okay.
Now we're seeing the presenter view.
Oh no. I'll just do it this way. Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Winnie Wakaba, and I'm the Economic Inclusion Manager, focusing on workforce development at Emerald Cities. I've been in this work for almost 2 years now, so I'm kind of very new to the clean jobs industry, but I've been working with marginalized communities throughout my whole career. It was just more in an international development capacity. Emerald Cities is a nonprofit, and we work on the intersection of equity and the environment. We are definitely DC based, but we have different offices around the country. The one here in the Northwest is in Seattle, and then we have one in the Bay Area. And then on the Northeast, we have, the DC area as well as Boston. I'm just gonna kind of switch back and forth just so I can see my notes. So the MEP work is generally in the energy services, and particularly we are seeing unprecedented growth and from the increase in adoption of heat pumps, from heating and air conditioning, new heat recovery and balanced ventilation requirements in commercial buildings. And we're really seeing an increase focus on air quality and ventilation resulting from forest fires and COVID-19. Investments in efficiency, infrastructure, and resilience will not meet the climate and equity goals unless there's an adequate supply of workers, and diversity and inclusion is definitely addressed. A recent study by the Seattle Jobs Initiative exposed the following challenges to reaching our climate and equity goals. So in this graph, you can definitely see there's an undersupply of workers in the mechanical, HVAC, electrical, and plumbing trades in the Tri-County area. And for us here in Washington State, that's King County, Snoqualmie County, and Pierce County. This undersupply represents from this undersupply results from caution by trades and apprenticeship programs due to their commitment to long-term employment, societal emphasis on post-secondary education versus trade work, an aging workforce, and the general workforce challenges present in our society and the region as a whole, particularly the exit of workers from the labor force due to COVID-19, which resulted in death, disability, and lack of dependent care. The MEP trades diversity does not reflect the community's diversity. Less than 20% of MEP trade workers are non-white, when over 35% of the community is non-white. The 2022 data in this particular study reflected little to no change from a study that they conducted in 2014. So my main focus for this panel, I really wanted to touch on kind of diversity in the workplace versus, how that translate, when contractors are really engaging with their customer base. And an example that I love giving is I run the HVAC training academy at Emerald Cities, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But a big part of one of our cohorts was that a large population of them were African immigrants. And in our HVAC training course, we focus a lot on electrical and electrical circuits, and they're really having a struggle. I really like being hands-on, doing kind of the electrical work. And, I had a talk with them and found out, me, an African immigrant myself, we're not that great with electricity. We let someone else do it. It's not for us. And so it was difficult trying to engage, a lot of African immigrants in our class to really kind of be comfortable touching electricity or really working with electrical circuits. And for us, that just meant, we have to be more culturally inclusive in our curriculum and kind of, just walk them through how to do the thing. So companies really with diverse workers, will create and foster human communication and connection with their customers, which creates empathy. And when customers see technicians, that look like them, it builds trust for that company. And they're more likely to recommend, to their friends and their family, which can only mean growth for, your contracting business or your firm. There's definitely a huge potential, from growth because, you promoted a wider capacity for your customer needs. So the pipeline for the MEP apprentices is not really reflective of the evolving demographics in the community, with generally less than 20% of apprentices being non-white, when 48% of the population is between 18 to 24 years of age, who is also non-white. This apprenticeship data really reflects training in, state registered apprenticeships, and it does not include significant workers entering the HVAC industry directly. We believe the demographics of these individuals reflect the general trend presented here as well. So our HVAC training academy, because HVAC technicians provide such a crucial service that's needed in every building, they're always in high demand, but we're especially in a time, when demand for HVAC expertise is at its highest. With climate change comes, more technology towards energy efficiency, and that means high demand for HVAC expertise. We know for a fact that this field of skilled work historically hasn't been very accessible for BIPOC community members, meaning that these high trades and high wage roles tend to not be accessible to those communities. So we especially invite members of the BIPOC community to apply to our workforce programs, to take advantage both of existing jobs and new job opportunities coming, especially with more federal investments coming down and going into workforce development. So for our program, our highest priority is training participants in positions that pay definitely $25 an hour. We usually connect with contractors that are able to meet that $25 an hour agreement, and we usually have articulation agreements with those contractors as well. Nationally, the median salary for HVAC careers is about $18 an hour. So we're always trying to be, above and beyond that salary range. It may not be immediately clear, at least for our participants, what HVAC career jobs might look like. And so we always share the HVAC career map. And I believe the link is hvaccareermap.org. It's a DOE website, and it just kind of covers, the different types of HVAC careers that are possible, from sales to marketing to engineering. And it also kind of shows you, the educational requirements, as well as the potential salary ranges for a particular job.
That's a great resource, by the way. I was poking around on it the other day. It's really good. We'll try to put that link in the chat.
Perfect. For our program is open to all participants. It's a 12-week program. We offer it to everyone, so everyone is eligible to apply, but we definitely have high priority for members of the BIPOC community. In an effort to fight climate change, we believe that if you create programs that really catered to the most marginalized, then everyone in the end will always, benefit from it. For our program, we usually have recruitment goals, and for us, that just looks like, a third of the class needs to be made up of women, and 2/3 of our class needs to be made up of BIPOC community members. We usually don't have a hard time meeting those BIPOC numbers. If anything, 99% of the people who apply to our programs are BIPOC identifying. I think the one that we have the challenge with the most is definitely getting more women in the trades. For our training content, we look for individuals who are looking to begin work immediately in the HVAC industry, or people who are already in the industry and they're looking to maybe, start their own businesses or kind of grow in their industry. And as I mentioned, our program is intended for, women, veterans, low-income individuals, and Black and Brown community members. In addition to our training program, we usually offer support services, and this just means, removing any barriers that our potential participants might be encountering. So the support services for us usually begin when the training starts, and that's kind of to help them overcome any barriers that they may be having in order to attend classes. That could mean, childcare assistance, transportation assistance. We usually offer, gas cards or an ORCA card, because we are in kind of like the Seattle metro area. So that just they can be able to make the classes. And then after the training is over, the support services continue for up to a year after. And for those, the support services are essentially the same, but the barrier there is kind of to eliminate the barriers of them kind of trying to get employment. And I think that's it for me.
That's great, Winnie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Winnie. Yeah, thanks, Craig. Really appreciate it from both of you. I had a question maybe to start off, and for both of you. It seems, we saw from both of you that there's a lack of installers and just HVAC, trained technicians. And Winnie, Emerald Cities is training a cohort of BIPOC focused installers, and Craig, I know that Green Savers works in-house to train folks. So I wonder if you could talk about both approaches, and is there a way to harness how do you see HVAC contractors harnessing the graduates of programs like Emerald Cities?
For me.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, Winnie, why don't you, I would love to hear, actually, I'd love to hear what you have to say about like success stories from people who have come out of your programs, entered the trades, and taken off?
For us, we usually try to connect our participants with WIMBY contractors. We found that they're kind of the best at ensuring, it's a safe space to work. They're offering the wages that we're looking for. I think the most important thing for us is that it's a space to work. We usually invite contractors to come speak to the participants, while training is ongoing. And we kind of have to vet our contractors before they come speak to our participants. Again, just to ensure that it's a safe place to work for BIPOC community members. And then we also connect with the participants after they've worked there for a while, kind of to see if, it's a contractor that we want to keep engaging with, or it's a contractor that we should kind of blacklist, because the participant isn't feeling, safe there.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's interesting, because that is, like, I think a huge part of the challenge, right? If you're trying to create spaces where people feel like comfortable and where they feel like they have opportunity and they can connect with and they can thrive, I think that, like, the first couple steps in that are the most difficult, certainly. And and I guess my experience heretofore is, like, it's very, very difficult to find people that's been our biggest challenge over all these years. And so, yeah, I think like Joe said, like, what we've kind of ended up doing a lot of is we tap our our people that work for us already in non-HVAC, so we have weatherization teams of people, and if we find people in those roles who are, have the mechanical aptitude and the problem solving skills, and they seem like they're motivated and they're good people and they've been doing this a while, then we do begin the laborious work of training them to be HVAC installers. I've always, like, my dream would be to set up these pipelines from some of these pre-apprenticeship or training programs. And I think, for me personally, the people that we've seen come out of those programs, and obviously we're not Seattle, I've never worked with yours, but I think a lot of them come out and are sort of just shell-shocked by the real world. Like that those programs, like, while they can train you in a lot of the skills, like the pace of work and the intensity of it, and especially in retrofit installations like what we do, the amount of uncertainty and problem solving that is required to, like, go into somebody's house that they live in a basement that's full of all their stuff, and figure out how to do this thing is overwhelming a lot. And what I have experienced is a lot of just attrition, people who, like, get out into the world and are not sure this is what they want to do. But I also always am wondering, like, how could we provide, and this is going to be part of the process. Like, I think training people to know how to do this stuff and be ready for these jobs is a critical role. And I also think training contractors in how to receive these people and create a soft place for them to land and begin to thrive. And, like, in companies like ours that, like, we actually have to make money to stay afloat. Like, I don't have funding coming in. I got it. And, like, so this is what I was talking to Winnie right before we started, just about how you, like, take the contractors like us who have all the skills, like, who are in a really good position to help these people get to develop their careers. We need the skills to bring them in, to welcome them, to provide a slow enough ramp so that they feel not stressed and supported, and somehow do that in a way that we need to, like, in whatever we talk about this all the time with PCEF, Portland Clean Energy Fund. Like, is there a way we can find some kind of funding that would allow us to take the pressure off, so that we can have, like, a post-apprenticeship program, like, come work for us for 6 months, but I don't have to worry about. I was
going to ask that exact question, because it feels like there's inevitably going to be a time when these new people who potentially are, they have the potential to be great, but it's going to take them a while to get up to speed. And initially they're not going to be as productive as, Craig, you would want them to be, because of the demands that you have from customers and clients, et cetera. So there's that time, it feels like, where it's almost like we need that gap funding. I don't know what else to call it, where these people can be paid in a way where they're not meeting your requirements yet, Craig, but they're learning, but they need to be paid enough to make it worth their while and make them feel like they're valued, et cetera. So I don't know, are there sources of funding for that? You know, is the workforce development training program from the IRA going to help with that? Any thoughts about that, Winnie?
I think there's some great programs out there. Our last cohort, we worked with the King County Youth Source Program. And that program is, I believe, for 18 to 24-year-olds, which we happen to have 3 in our previous cohort. And after our 12-week program, they were able to be paired with a contractor for an additional 12 weeks. And the county paid them, $21.50 an hour for those 12 weeks, while they kind of just like shadowed the contractor. And then the contractor at the end of, those 12 weeks could decide whether or not to keep that participant on kind of as a full-time staff. So I think that's kind of good, like keep your feet wet to see if you really like it or not. And I believe programs like that could be great. I'd say the issue that we ran with there was that, after that training, the contractor mentioned that, their starting salary was $16 an hour, which is kind of a huge shift from $21.50. And, it makes retention really difficult. It makes placement really difficult. And I don't, especially, these are low income individuals. I'm kind of telling them to go from, $21.50 to $16 an hour. And I think we don't talk enough about, we always want, workforce development programs and, people working on workforce development, but we don't really talk about, the contractor role. I think we really need to keep contractors accountable, put them in some training programs if they're really interested in diversifying their workforce, if they're really interested in getting workers, if we really need to, install a lot of heat pumps, I think contractors have to be held accountable to kind of do their part in increasing their workforce.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Winnie, because, it's like if you're, a guy who's grown up in the HVAC industry and surrounded by white guys like you, and that's the water you swim in, it makes sense that they would need some help to understand how to shift their thinking and their practices a little bit in order to make their operation more friendly to people who don't look like them. I think that's fair that service, that kind of training should be part of this as well. I like that. I know we're a little bit over time here, and but there was one question that came up that's maybe back to the kind of whole home electrification topic that I thought I would ask you, Craig, about, which was and this, I was kind of thinking the same thing when this went along. Are you aware of any kind of like checklist or like template that homeowners might use to help them to navigate this, to give them like, here's 10 things you should be thinking about, or here's 10 questions to ask, or whatever it is. Or I like the whole thing of like, hey, if your HVAC contractor doesn't go in your attic when he comes to give you a bid, then don't hire him. Anything like that you know of that we could pass on to our audience?
I frankly don't, and I think I'm sure that there are some resources that exist. I'm sure you could just Google like top 10 questions to ask your HVAC contractor, and somebody out
probably
there on BPI or whatever, Green Building Advisor, somebody's gonna have some opinions on that. And I think one of the challenges is the fact that if you're going to try to make like the branching diagram of all the different questions you might need to ask in a given home, like if I could do that, I would just have that, and I would give it to my consultants and say, here, do your job, it's easy. The problem is that every house is different. Like I've been doing this for a long time, and we learn stuff every week. We like see something we've never seen before, which seems impossible, but it's true. Every time I say that, I'm like, well, we'll probably never see anything new again. And then whatever, we see something new. And so I think it is really difficult, but I do think there are some resources out there. And certainly, like I think if your HVAC contractor doesn't go in your attic, that's where I was getting at. It's like, ask them to, just like know the questions like, hey, how do you do a load calc if you have no idea how much insulation I have? And the guy's like, I don't, I'll go, let me go look, you know, like a lot of times you can get, like I said, like there is a, you know, you are fighting market forces here, and a lot of those dudes are hustling. They're out there,
exactly.
they're trying to flying 6-7 bids a day, and they're just writing stuff down, and they're doing it quick. And it's not because they don't know what the best practice is. It's just because the market doesn't incentivize the best practice.
Yeah,
and so if you, it is important to let these people know that you are actually, you want those best practices, and you're willing to do this stuff, and you want to know the answers, and you're willing to pay for it. I mean, I think that's
yeah,
part of the
absolutely.
deal.
I mean, the load calc thing is a really good one, a good example of that, because, you know, you don't even have to understand what it is, but if you ask your contractor, did you do a load calculation? And if they say yes, and you say, can I see it? And then you'll know whether they actually did it. And you don't even need to understand it. But but if they don't have something to show you there, then that means they probably didn't do it. And which means that you're probably not going to get the right size system. And so there are some sneaks like that, but I wish we had the cheat sheet. Okay,
Yeah.
Joe, do you have any other questions?
Maybe a quick
wrap up.
A quick two. We'll see if we have time. But the first one is someone who's asking about licenses needed, you know, to become this integrated HVAC contractor. And maybe for Winnie and Craig, you know, what are we're tracking with heat pump water heaters. Oregon is kind of setting the standard. They have a specialty plumber's license, which is almost a heat pump water heater license, install tech license. But what licenses would a person need to be practicing this holistic HVAC?
Right. Yeah. So that is kind of one of the tricky things, right? Like for us, we have to have the mechanical license so that we can pull full mechanical permits from the city. We also have a mechanical minor label that we can pull from the city. We have that minor label plumbing. And so if we do a ducted heat pump water heater, we have to put a minor label. We have to put a minor label plumbing sticker on there. We have to put a minor label electrical because we reconnected the electrical and we connected the plumbing. And then if we duct it outside, we need to pull a full mechanical permit. And so we do need all those. We do need all those licenses. And that's why it's hard, right? Like that's why it's difficult to find a person who can do all that stuff. And certainly I actually, despite the fact I've been in this a long time and I care a lot, I find the licensure situation arcane. And if you ask me to like tell you the names of all these permits and licenses and stuff, I could probably get it wrong because it's complicated. And the levels of electrical are really complicated. I mean, Green Service as an organization, we certainly to achieve our goals long term, we need to have an electrician who works for us in house. And we've been spending the better part of the last year just trying to figure out what that would take, because it's not really cut and dry. You know, we need to try to hire somebody who's a signing supervisor, but that dude's probably not going to do the work. And so we need to hire a journeyman. And you know, like it's definitely a hassle. And that is one of the challenging things, certainly. I could talk about this for a while, but basically, yes, that is one of these reasons why it's nice to find a holistic contractor. And you do find trades companies like that do this stuff. Like you will find an organization that has electricians, HVAC, and plumbing kind of under the same roof, but they're probably not a holistic home performance. They're not thinking about, you know, electrification and its you know, all of its green building ramifications, you know. And so but you could at least find somebody who could do all the things you wanted under one roof if you could identify the things that you needed done, you know. Mm-hmm.
And Winnie, is there remind us again the licenses or the certifications that folks exit the workforce training program with?
For us, it's OSHA 10 and just, you know, the certification from the institute that kind of does our curriculum. But we do offer like payments if our participants want to explore other certifications. I know some have done the boiler ones. I did forget to mention that we do have direct entry into CITC's HVAC apprenticeship. So if people are interested in going into apprenticeship after our training program, it's definitely an option as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Perfect. Maybe I'll just ask one other quick one. Folks were asking how can they find holistic contractors in other parts of the country? You know, any thoughts on that, Craig? Any parting thoughts on how
Well,
folks can look at that.
somebody in the chat did put BPI's contractor finding tool in here. And I think that would be a decent place to start. The Building Performance Institute, or like where you go to get certified as a building analyst and envelope shell professional. And that certainly people, if you could find a company, if you found an HVAC company that had people working there that were BPI certified, that would be a great place to start. So that seems like a useful thing. Obviously, I mean, that if you're lucky enough to the Department of Energy, Energy Star, they do that Contractor of the Year thing. Obviously, there's not that many of those, but there's not just one either. Like, like 1 year, I think there were 4 of us or something who got that Contractor of the Year award. And if you were to go look at their historical, like who they handed those things out to, I bet you that a lot of the places in the United States are probably represented in that. And like, if you found somebody who was able to convince the Department of Energy that they're a Contractor of the Year, that would be a great place to start. Obviously, that's not for everyone, but there's a bunch of them. There are, and they come from all corners of the United States. So, and then I think a lot of people find us by calling the Energy Trust, right? So if you have a local utility program that handles the incentives, if you like just figure out which government or non-government organization is the one that facilitates you getting a rebate for installing a high efficiency, whatever. If you call that organization and say, hey, can I get the name of a contractor who could help me with this list of multiple things, they might be able to point you in the right direction. I mean, obviously the Energy Trust has a ton of trade allies that are just HVAC contractors that will not insulate your attic. But if you said, hey, I need insulation and a heat pump, they would know, they know how to triangulate on their list who could do both those things for you.
All right.
I've also, the utilities is also a good place to look. I mean, sometimes the utilities will have a kind of a list of their preferred contractors or contractors who are they consider to be the most experienced in these areas. So that can also be helpful. But unfortunately, there isn't a really great directory nationally for this sort of thing that I've been able to find. It's kind of spotty from state to state, it seems. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I think we've had a great long webinar, and I appreciate everyone for attending, and a real huge thanks to Craig and Winnie for their time today and sharing their expertise and their great work that they're both doing. Brian, anything to leave?
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Winnie, and thank you to all of you in the audience for listening in today. And good luck with all your electrification projects. And we hope to see you again on one of our webinars in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd be happy to field them.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.